This is awesome. Thank you so much. You broke it down. And again, I am listening, actively listening, but I'm using some of my brain RAM, the backup RAM, where I'm thinking about content, and I immediately thought about another piece of content that I might have to push out where it's almost like Formula One. Like, I don't love Formula One and the cards, but I know that, I've seen the Netflix Drive to Survive series, and what I didn't realize, which is so fascinating to me, is these lower tiered racing companies, they're not trying to win the race. They're just trying to get points so that they are in like the mid tier. So they're not fighting
Hmm.
for the Red Bulls and the Mercedes and the Ferraris. They're fighting against each other like that mid tier. And so when you talk about which games they're playing, it's like, yeah, they don't want to be number one. They're fun, like these. Oh my goodness, what was it called? Like Williamson or Williams Racing Company. They were like thrilled to get like 14th, and I'm like, you were happy to get 14th place, and they're just like hugging each other and like they won the Super Bowl, and I'm like, wow, I guess that's a really big deal for them to get 14th or something like that. So um or maybe it's not 14th, maybe it was like 10th place or 8th place, because I guess there are 20. Okay, look, I should stop talking about Formula One, but
No, no,
um
no. But that's exactly right, though.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
without knowing what the sort of cost structure is and sort of the actual expectations internally and like the goals, it's
yeah,
hard to really evaluate like how well these companies are doing. You know, as it's perceived through their end. Like, what are they? How they may be celebrating when we think that they're like really struggling, and we just don't know. And to your point of
yeah.
like your series you want to do with like the companies and the graders, I would love
Mhm.
to hear that because like you really don't like these are sort of like people that are kept behind the scenes for a number of different reasons. And so to the
Right.
degree that you could shed more light on like the ins and outs of it, like we have the benefit of PSA having been public where I can read their financials and look at their earnings transcripts and stuff like that
Mhm.
to understand the ins and outs of it. But like
Right.
for the most part, we don't understand the ins and outs of a lot of these companies, and I'd love to hear more of it because I do think it's fascinating, and I think these companies should be a little bit more vocal because it would help. Again, like I think if you think about the premium I mentioned earlier of like how these slabs are sort of
Yeah.
perceived and priced in the market, like a lot of
Right.
that comes to like over communicating and being transparent and like speaking to your audience and bringing them along on the journey with you rather than just being like,
Yeah.
here's your grade, good luck figuring out like why, and good luck figuring out like what we're doing, good luck figuring out how we got there. And so I do
Right.
think like the more transparent these companies, and that's why I think Pete's been really well received in the sense that
Yeah.
he's
Definitely.
speaking really well to like the plans of what SGC is doing, how they got there, sort of like what they're focused on. I think I love when I hear Nat out there. I'd like to see Beckett do
Mhm.
more of those
Mhm.
conversations. I think CGCs now that they're merged is doing more of that. And like, I think that like Tag and all these emerging companies, Arena and things like that, like they will benefit from being vocal. And so I think
Yeah.
your series can be really well done if
We'll
they
see.
agree to it. And I hope they do.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get a representative from Frog Tree Grading Company. And G, if you were asking about Frog Tree Grading Company, I just found out that that's an actual thing, or Tree Frog or Frog. When I was at Arena Club, they're like, "Did you know there's an actual frog?" I'm like, "What? That's a thing?" So anyway, it's just wild. But no, that was a very good answer. Thank you so much. But I will not be making content about frogs, or maybe I will. I don't know. Oh, the other
Yet,
thing I wanted to say is
yet.
with these with these sonically welding machines, it's like there is a huge like fixed cost that comes with that. It's almost like
Hmm.
these I don't want to equate it to the actual cost, but like these hospitals where they have these MRI machines, and people are like, why are these MRI so expensive? It's because the actual machine is so expensive to begin with for the hospital to acquire that they have to make money off it eventually. So I don't know what the break even point is, but I can imagine that even if the plastic itself is super cheap and the labor is relatively cheap, that there are these huge initial overlays, whether it is with AI technology or these sonically welding machines, for these companies to have to put out in the front for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think it's hard to know for sure, like what investments going into a lot of these companies. I mean, you obviously see like the Tag display at the national, and it's like clearly like they've spent a lot of money. They spent a lot
Yeah,
of money on technology, and like so. Anyways, their break even is probably a lot, right? Because
yeah,
they just have to get to a certain point where they actually have like operating leverage, and it's going to take you know I don't know, could be years for them to get there. I have no idea, but I mean they've obviously
exactly.
invested. They say they've been in the market for 10 years developing the technology, 10 years of
Yeah,
cost that they have to
right.
sort of
Wow.
recoup.
Totally. All right, so I got three more questions and the final conclusory. So BG, I don't know what state he's from, but he asks, how can we have more accurate pop reports on specific cards? Because what happens when there's a crossover or a crack resub? does and I'll just add, does a crossover result in any documentation that occurs across companies? Like, I doubt it, because I doubt that these companies are sharing information with each other, but it's just something I had to ask. What do you think happens when there's a crossover or a crack resub?
Yeah, I think what happens is what we expect. There's just like not a lot of transfer of information. It's like, these are evaluated independently for the most part, and this has not been an industry that's sort of been really forward with data. And so I do think, like, if we want to grow this hobby, there again, I'll make throw the politician hat back on, but like the more data and the more transparent we can be, there's a lot of benefits to that. And so I do think, like, I don't want to be the one to spearhead that, at least not at this stage, but like I do think, like, more collaboration between the companies and a willingness to sort of like share certain data points would be valuable, for sure. Even from like a fraud database that's been discussed for many years in this hobby, or like counterfeits and things like that, to crossing a lot of that stuff. I think like that would be productive. And there is a lot of waste. I mean, there's a lot of waste in this hobby, and there is like this weird benefit to the grading companies. Like, this waste actually results
Right.
in like more submissions a lot of times,
Right.
and that
Right.
actually is like ultimately counterproductive. So if they're sort of willing to sort of place a bet on the long term of the hobby, maybe they'd be willing to reduce some of this waste that sort of has short term benefit, and that they get more grading submissions, but like results in a worse collector experience, or just like, misinformation, or just like a lack of information, I should say. And so
Yeah.
there's not a lot of sharing of information. People have approached me about the idea of sort of like spearheading that, and it's just a lot. It's a lot to sort of say, like, okay, I'm going to get these companies that haven't shared data historically
Right.
to share it in a way that they're comfortable, and I have to produce an output that they're comfortable,
Mhm.
and I have to, as somebody that's bootstrapped this for the most part, like,
Right.
think about like, how do I take on a resource intensive operation like that? And it's just not in my wheelhouse, and it's also something that I just think is like not core to my mission yet.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a benefit. I just don't think it's going to be me or Gemrate sort of as a whole that sort of like leads that charge. But I'm happy to sort of like facilitate some of that. But I do think it has
Right.
to happen. I think like there should be more sharing of it, and if people need to look past the near term benefit of increased grading in the short term for like a better hobby in the long
Mhm.
term. Again, it's like, sounds cool. That's the reality of it. Like, people will have better experiences if people are more willing to sort of like share some of this data.
Right. No, I mean, how many times when you're a content creator, because you are in a way a content creator, because you're creating those Instagram posts and you're providing information and value. You're providing some of the best educational content on Instagram because of what you do. But I mean, how many times have I been told you should do this? You should. I call them the should heads, and I'm not cursing there. It's the should heads. You should do this. It's like, thanks. Why don't you do it? Like, you have an Instagram account. Why you're DMing me this stuff? Just, hey, I'll help you. Like, I get so many requests where people are just like, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. It's like, it sounds great. Run with it. Or like what I shouldn't do. And it's like, no, I'm gonna do what I do. It's fine. It's not
Right.
like I'm
Right.
monetizing this. But anyway,
Yes.
I vote for you for your politician hat. What you have my vote, sir. Absolutely.
I appreciate
Um,
that.
but let me just say, like, bearing the brunt, we've talked about this multiple times. We've bear the brunt for many things along the way: declared value, insurance, shipping, and all that, or not insurance, but shipping. But cracking, like, we bear the brunt. I mean, how awesome would it be if you had a crossover where these companies would promise you that the person who cracks it will not be the same person who grades it, so that they have one component that cracks it, they do not know, and so that there's no bias. Like, oh, hey guy, this used to be a 9. We can't give it a. Everyone's worried. The reason people crack and resub is because there's no trust in the crossover, because they think
Hmm.
that, oh, hey guys, we got an 8 here. You can't go over a 9 at best, right? It's like one of those things. So it's really interesting if the discussions like this can lead to change, because I think that would be
Yeah.
really awesome to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's an interesting piece of content to be done about like this. If you followed a card for a year and like just like watched it go through the hands of like many different players, because there really hasn't been incentives, and I'm big on like incentives and motivations, as I said, and like
Yeah.
first principles, and like there's just not been an incentive. Like, it's been a near term benefit to a lot of these companies to just allow more cards to come through and not put this data in place, that allows for better tracking and sort of like a reduction of sort of like resubmissions and crossing and all these different things. And that's been a challenge. But like, I think about it now, like I get cards that come back a 6, and I'm like, well, I know if I cracked it and sold it raw, I'd make more money. But it's like, well, that
Mm.
doesn't do anything for the hobby in the long run. And so, that's the question that I'll sort of ask myself, and try to stay true to being like, no, I'll just leave it in the slab and sort of be proud that it's is what it is, or resubmit it to the same company and just say that, like, hey, give this 6 another look. Like, I actually think it was just like misgraded. But
Right.
like actually, what you do see is like people that want to take advantage of the system and probably buy sixes and sevens online, crack them and sell them as raw, or
Right.
try to cross them over. Anyways, point being is like better information again will lead to sort of like a lot, at least like some reduction of wasted energy and wasted
Hmm.
money in this hobby. And I think that does benefit a lot of people in the long run. But we'll see. I think I'm saying that like it's something that's easy to sort of like facilitate, or sort of like switch on. And I do think it
Hmm.
takes like years to sort of like build that practice and put the incentives in place for these companies to benefit.
Better ingredients. No, just kidding. Moving on. Um, so I actually have it's a 1996 base Fleer Ultra Michael Jordan. I've had it through three grading companies. I can't remember the exact. I wish I had the card, and I wish I had the exact information. But it started off as an ISA 10, which people are like, why are you cracking a 10? I put it through PSA. I can't remember if it got a 9, but I don't think it got a 10 because, well, we won't get into Michael Jordan Pop Control PSA. Sorry.
Mm.
And then BGS, I think it's currently in a BGS, and I can't remember if it's in a 9 or 9.5. But I have a card right now that I've been doing an independent internally, just testing out. And maybe I should put it through CGC and Arena Club and just see how it happens. But yeah, I'm kind of doing that again. I'm bearing the brunt. I'm paying all these grading fees for what? Like, I haven't even made content around that particular thing, but it fascinates me.
Yep.
It really does.
Yeah, and I mean, look, even you doing that, I think there's risk too, because it's like we overlook this in a lot of the content I watch. But like, I've seen people crack these slabs and they're miserable at it, and it's like, you're probably damaging the slab, the card in the process, right? Like letting that thing fall to the table like you are,
Yes.
not productive, right? That's going to result in a reduction, and that's not on the grading companies. But anyway, it's like yeah, there's a lot of inefficiencies and waste in this industry, and I think
Right.
that's like a big source of it. And I don't know the answer in the near term, but I do think like there needs to be better collaboration between the companies, and
Yeah.
but the incentives have to be there. And when you have one player that candidly dominates the industry,
Right.
it makes it hard. Like they have to
Yeah.
be sort of the one that leads that charge, and they have to almost take like a near term hit to what they're doing to sort of like know that there's a benefit to the bigger picture. And again,
Right.
I don't know that I think they're willing to do that, but it's also like they've got a lot going on. Is that the initiative
Oh,
or
yeah.
sort of the battle they want to fight today?
Exactly, exactly. So there are two more questions, but I did want to ask you: have you seen that people have been trying to crack slabs by running over them with car tires? Have you seen this?
No, no,
I'm
that's
gonna have
good
to.
content. I hopefully they're doing it more for
Oh,
the wow
I
factor and the shock.
there are some things I do without my wife's consent with regards to like the hobby, but that one I had to ask her, and she's like, "You are absolutely not going to run over, even if it's just plastic. You're not using our minivan to run over a slab for content or to see if you can do it." So that's one piece of content I'm gonna have to leave to other folks. But yeah, I've used a Swiss Army knife. I know that the wire cutters is the best way to do it, but I was just kind of playing around with it, and I just wanted to see if there are other ways to crack it. But no, but this is great. I'm gonna send you that video though. You're gonna love it. uh
Yeah, that's a new challenge that I wasn't aware of, but I can
yeah,
appreciate the shock factor behind it.
did it for the gram, I guess. But my wife, she's very supportive in many ways with me in the hobby, but not when it comes to using our car and things like that. Okay, so here's the next question. And this is the fun one because we've talked about resume, we've talked about interview, we've talked about hourly rates. Mike from New York, and I'm not making that up. Mike from New York asks, "Do you know what these companies generally look for when they hire graders?" And I'll add, where do they even post these jobs at? Because you alluded to that earlier. Is there a website for that, or do you have to just know somebody? I think basically Mike wants to know, can he apply to be a grader? I think he really wants a job at one of these companies. So let's help him out if you can.
Yeah, hey, Mike from New York, Ryan here. I think you can definitely like throw your hat in the ring, and I think look, I mean, the reality is it's not that obvious, and I think like now that we've seen the industry scaling, it's much more obvious, like because you're seeing more postings. But I think historically, like a lot of the graders came from industry in the sense that they were store owners. I think I've heard. I think
Mm,
like a lot of promotions from within. So you might be doing operations, you might be doing research, and then you move over to grading. I think that happens pretty commonly. So you might not enter directly through grading and end up there as it relates to like actually assigning the grades. You might be a different part of the process. But you're seeing now as the hobby scale that there just has to be more of a willingness and sort of more tolerance towards people who don't have the experience or direct exposure to it.
mhm.
But again, I think like right now you could look online and you'll see there's PSA listings for it, right? Or at least there were, and you could find it sort of somewhere cataloged somewhere on the internet. But Yeah, it's mostly industry knowledge that people look for, and I think you're
Hmm.
seeing it much more, segmented now. Like Pokemon knowledge can be its own discipline, right? Vintage
Mm.
is its own discipline, right? That's I actually think it's much less likely that you're cross genres and more likely that you're specific to one. And so, I think like you're only a Pokemon grader, you're only an ultra modern grader, and you're only a vintage grader, right? Which
Hmm.
is why you see some of these like things move faster through the system and some things move slower through the system. I think they're more willing to lean into sort of the emerging trends in the hobby. And I think that, like things like vintage just are growing at a slower pace because that's not necessarily seeing the same explosion from a grading standpoint. It's also more just hard to grade because it's expensive. Um, but yeah, short answer is like I think they look for knowledge, and if you're probably specific to one category, that's to your benefit. And you have to be like really detail oriented. You see that a lot.
Hmm.
I think I don't know why you see it on there too, but you kind of have to be able to like roll with the punches a lot and sort of be able to like think quickly. I don't know what that means, but like if you look at the postings online, like there's a lot of it seems like there's a lot of sort of like piecing together, stringing things together on the fly in those
Yeah.
roles. And I don't necessarily know why that's the case, but you have to be sort of like quick on your feet too, and you have to be able to focus because you're doing the same thing all day.
Hmm.
It just and like that's not a good job for me. I would fail at it miserably in the sense that like
Yeah.
I mean I could throw a podcast on all day, right?
Yeah.
But I'm probably letting those grades slip through a few of those nines or tens and
Oh
tens or
my
nines
goodness.
because I'm gonna lose focus. And so I think that's important too. But I'm speaking for what I'm reading on job listings. So that's probably
Got
where
it.
my expertise ends. And I don't really know any graders personally well. And so I don't know, like, ultimately, like, what sort of, you know, um, tips the scale in the favor of another candidate if they're sort of equal on the resume front. But that's the stuff that I read about, at least, or have heard about online.
Yeah, and I'll just say TLDR, Mike from New York, Google it. Just Google it. If you really want it, you're gonna find that information online. Everything's available right at your fingertips. But no, I love the imagery of like a creator at some company right now, literally listening to this podcast and these words coming out of my mouth and just listening. And if you and I made him laugh in some way and someone's card gets chipped, oh, that would be hilarious. No, not for the person who owns the card,
Yeah,
but
not for the submitter. Yeah.
again, yeah, content creation. Okay, so this one is from an anonymous. This person, I won't even say the gender. This person would like to wishes to remain anonymous. It's a really good question. It's a really hard one. Okay, Ryan, I don't know if you're ready for this because I read it. I'm like, oh man, I don't even know how to answer this. Um, so here we go. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
All right, this is the second to last. Oh no, this is the last one, and then the what's on the horizon for you. What can GemRate's monthly grading reports teach us about collectors' sentiment in the hobby?
Huh. Okay, you actually went with the hard one. I thought you were setting me up for a softball
Like a
or
really, yeah, like
offbeat question. Sentiment in the hobby. I think that. Oh man, trying not to overly
while
generalize.
you
I
think,
mean,
let me
one
just say
thing.
this.
Mhm.
I do apologize that this question did come after like I kind of did the show prep note email and you give me the bio, and it was like one of these questions where it kind of came in last minute before and I do apologize for coming late into the studio because I was in the other studio, but I this may be an unanswerable question. I mean, really, like we're talking, like you're a very data driven guy, and I mean, collector sentiment. Like, I mean, nothing against the person asked it because I regarded them very highly, but I saw this question and I was like, oof, that's a tough one. But I did want to ask it.
Yeah, no, I think there's levels to it in the sense of like I think sentiment as a whole is grading pretty popular, right? I think like that's
Mhm.
the number one thing is like, and there's a whole other podcast we could do about like why people grade and like, whatever. But it's people like grading for a number of reasons, and so grading is very popular. It's been very successful despite sort of the ups and downs over the last few years, and it seems like there's still a lot of momentum there and a lot of investment still going into it. And I think if the grading companies are able to sort of like increase the value of grading beyond just sort of like secondary market prices and like making it more useful for you as a collector, in a number of ways, grading will become even more popular in the long run. So I think sentiment is positive as it relates to that. I think what it teaches you sort of about the pockets of the hobby is just like there's a lot of like fast followers and like people that are like groupthink, right? I mean, like one of the things you have to you have to be first or early, or oftentimes you're in the same boat with a lot of other people where it's like becomes unproductive pretty quickly in the sense of like there's only like a certain threshold of cards that people are willing to sort of like are willing to pay up for up front, and then they sort of get caught up in the rest. They caught up in a sea of sameness, and so like what I just mean by that is like if you're great, that's why base sort of died out. Was like
Hmm.
people realize like if you get based in early, you can get a pretty quick return. But if you're sort of in like the middle of the pack with that, it becomes really
Yeah.
hard to move because like the
Right.
supply becomes out, quickly outgrows demand, and that becomes
Right.
problematic. But I do think like you see people who are in that race, but don't necessarily like know that they're in it yet. And so, the sentiment I think is just like there's a lot of people sort of moving in a similar direction,
Hmm.
and the complete, but like I guess where I sort of like to close the loop on that, like not necessarily knowing like where their position is in the race because like all these processes are different. Like you don't know until you sort of like have finished. I'm trying to think if I could string this together, but you don't know until you finish like what place you finished in, and you're like, oh shit,
Hmm.
sorry, oh shoot,
It's okay. Oh shoot.
I did finish in the last
There's no
later
way a
half of
kid.
the.
There's no way a kid under the age of eight, like whatever,
Yes,
is
listen
listening
this
this
long.
far into it. If this is for the, this is like hobbyist Thompson After Dark. Because I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
like you've been providing amazing information. But continue, please.
Um, so anyways, I think like, you just don't know where you finish until sort of you get your cards back, and it takes a long
Hmm.
time, and there's a lot of uncertainty in that process. So but you see a lot of like people moving in the same direction. And then the
Hmm.
last thing is just sort of like I think there's a lot of interesting pockets. So like one of the things I do is I publish some like weekly reports on just like emerging players and
Yeah,
emerging trends and
I've seen
emerging
it.
cards. And you see like one person can move a whole market for a player, and like it doesn't take like, you
Right.
submitting more than like 50 cards of a player to sort of like move that market. So
Wow.
within that you also find like some of these niches and like these pockets of the hobby that are really interesting, which is like, oh, I'm going to go grade this SI for kids card that nobody's thinking about, or I'm going to go grade
Mm.
like this sort of like second tier card that I think there's a play on in the market that people aren't necessarily thinking about yet. So anyways, you can kind of like see the big picture macro trends where I think like people, you have to be first, or oftentimes you're not going to be nearly as productive if you're sort of in that second tier. And then there's also sort of like you can be really productive within like a lot of the niches of the hobby, but you have to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more open to sort of like what your sort of array of cards or consideration set is. I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, it makes me wonder. You were just talking about the SI for kids. I wonder. I don't know who the other. I don't know if it's like eight. Like there's nine on one page, but the other players on that set. I wonder who's perforated right next to Wemby, because that could be a play. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how good those other players are. But when you're talking about the value beyond the secondary market value, I love that because that is what the collector wants. It's not just the value. It's not just the flip. It's not just the money and the investment. It's about why I love this card. And again, not getting paid by any of these grading companies, but to give a shout out to Rare Edition. As far as I know, and I don't know much about it, but as far as I know, there's this thing where you can actually record the provenance, or not just the provenance, like any 10-second clip you want, and that QR code in the back can basically take you to that moment that you want to associate a memory with that card. I think that's fantastic. Like I think,
Yeah.
again, if I'm correctly or accurately describing that technology, if you're able to connect memories, because that's what we're going for, we're chasing memories, we're chasing something, our childhoods or whatever, to be able to do that just sounds really cool.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of ways that cards can work harder for us. I've said that one other time, I think, but it's like right now the utility is mostly associated with like making money, and
Hmm.
that's like you know um, whatever. It's like very
There's
limited in sort of the scope of where I think
Yeah,
these can go, which is like
yeah,
cards are fashion for a lot of people. It's like
right.
it's
Ah,
identity, it's
yep,
expression, it's like
yep.
what your values are. Like I collect Isaac Okoro, which means something to me that
So
most people
sorry.
don't care about, but like I but I like Okoro.
Yeah,
He's like this
okay.
quiet but like hardworking player on the Cavs, and like he's a good
Hmm.
defensive player. And like I like him, and I can get his
Yeah,
cards relatively affordably. Um,
yes.
but that says something about like the way that I collect, and I collect Obsidian for a certain reason, and I
Right.
collect, anyway. Um, but it's really hard to showcase. And like all these companies are building vaults, and all these companies are
Yeah.
building things where it's like, if these are pieces of fashion for you or ways for you to sort of like help tell your collecting story, and
Hmm.
they're not in your hands, they need to facilitate making that easier for you. And so they need
Right.
to think beyond like, okay, beyond the sort of idea of this flip and grade, I mean, grade to flip concept, like where else can we sort of add to? And I think companies are starting to sort of like,
Hmm.
dabble a bit there, but that's
Yeah.
like where I'm really excited to see like where the innovation comes. And like I do think provenance is a big part of that. Like there's if it was between card A and card B, and I knew card B was in another collector's hands that was important to me or sort of like meant
Hmm.
something to my collecting journey, I would grab that card and I'd probably pay a premium for it. So like
Yeah.
there's certain parts of the story that are missing, and I think like can definitely be elevated with more investment over time.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to vault skinny jeans. I mean, although at this point I'm never fitting back into them, but I just had a thought. What if local card shops could be a vault? Like, what if they had like a safer vault where you're like, we will vault your cards? And I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I love this idea. Okay, we're gonna have to move on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think decentralizing the vaults to card shops is interesting. I'm sort of sorry for being like
Oh,
nerdy in that sense, but I do think like bringing it to the shops and like having things be a little bit more like accessible and available, but still providing a lot of like the benefits of the digital and sort of the side of security side of like what's happening with
yeah,
vaults. I think that's
yeah.
interesting, and I never have heard of that, so I think that's really
I
interesting.
look, I just come up with content idea. I like to think out of the box. I mean, everything is just so stodgy and like, just I come in with a fresh new perspective where again, I'm telling other people to do this because of course I'm not a local card shop owner, but if I was a local card shop owner, I'd be like, "Hey, I don't know how the monetary aspect would work because I'm really bad at that stuff, but you come to the local card shop, you can look at cards whenever you want. You can take them out and you can keep them, but we have some recording bookkeeping system where we know what we have at all times. It's insured, it's locked away, it's in a huge safe that no one can just come and get. I mean, by the way, people, there's a ton of expensive other cards that aren't vaulted that are broken into, right? But you put it away in a safe, it's humidity controlled, it's moisture controlled, or whatever, a temperature controlled, and come and get your cards while you're here. We got some new wax. It just seems like a no-brainer. So, like, I just made $1 million idea just happened out of thin air. Man, I should be a local car shop owner. Okay, that's the next chapters in the Hobby S. Thompson saga. All right, here we go.
I love it, love it.
Oh my goodness, Ryan, you're fantastic. I cannot believe we're this far in. This might be the longest podcast episode, but you've been such
I
fantastic guests.
apologize. I apologize.
No, do not apologize. So long as you're having fun. Are you having fun? Because we're
Of course, I love this stuff. It's so
then
interesting.
well,
And
the
you're
ride's
asking
about
great
to.
questions. A lot of questions I have not been asked yet. So
Thank
these
you.
are fun.
Yes, no one else will have a better interview. You better tell everyone that I was your best interviewer. Although this is not supposed to be one, but I guess at this point it is. The last question is easy because it's about you and your company. It's a nice send off question. It's really about what's on the horizon for Ryan and GemRate. On the website, and you've alluded to it that you're working on Universal Pop Search, which sounds super exciting. Um, please don't say you're going to charge us for the information, but well, like what's in the horizon for you? And you can use that whether it's going to be the end of this calendar year in 2023, the next year, the next 5 years. Just I think people would love to root for you, and please give us a reason to root for you.
Hey, well, I appreciate that. And this is a total snooze fest answer after all the stuff we talked about. But I mean, it is like, bringing that universal pop report to life and sort of like understanding different ways. Everybody says they want this, or a lot of people say they want it, but like, I still am learning like the different ways that people would utilize it. And so, one, I would just say like, I'm always open to feedback and I'm still learning as it relates. Like, I'm building a lot of my vision and sort of like things that I do in the hobby and like broadly what I watch and sort of learn about online. But like, I still would like more direct feedback there. But like, distributing the universal pop report, so integrating into other tools, overlaying the universal pop report, so when you're actually on other sites you see information like you can imagine where eBay, you have a Chrome extension that's sort of overlaying the pop report, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not that far off my radar. And then also just like what would it actually look like if you were looking at 2019 Panini Prism or 1993 Finest or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
How would these look like if you actually saw it through the lens of all grading companies and
Mm-hmm.
one individual pop report that was comprehensive, or at least like covered most of the companies, right? Like, how would you want to see that data? What kind of decisions would you make based off of that data? What might you do differently? And so it's just thinking about like how to bring this to the consumer, because a lot of what I have been doing is focused on the B2B lens, and I'm still very focused on that. But I do want to bring more of the consumer application to life in the back half of this year. So I'm going to be doing a lot more like um, interactive work with the audience, just to understand like how do they
Nice.
want to sort of like see this come to life, and sort of like
Yeah.
what are some of the higher profile sets and things that people would like to see, because I can't do it all yet. I don't have
Yeah.
this all solved, but I can
Yeah.
start to, and none of the tools do for the at this stage for most of the pricing side of things. And so it's like, how
Yeah.
can I get this to a point where it's meaningful but not necessarily like solving all problems? And
Yeah.
so just bringing that to market in the back half of the year is like one of the primary focuses at this stage.
Wow. It seems like you're in the feedback stage, and that it's almost like not crowdsourcing, but you're going to be taking in a lot of collectors' information and feedback, and you're going to try to incorporate it. I think that's fantastic. Um, you are this has been an awesome interview. You're a fantastic individual. I for being such a good sport. I'm gonna find a Isaac Okoro, Evan Mobley dual patch to send your way. It can't be that expensive, right? I mean, no offense, but it's
I don't know if it exists, but if you find it, it'll be worth it because I
Obsidian.
haven't
It
seen
was,
one, and
yeah, it's got to be
I
Obsidian.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
I appreciate
Obsidian
that.
rookie. Well, I don't know if it's gonna be a dual RPA. I don't even know if that exists, but yeah, Isaac Okoro. I definitely have Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley's in my PC that are languishing. So I haven't said this to other guests. Maybe I should as a thank yous, but I now that I know who you collect, and maybe I'll send something your way. But I wish you the best of luck. Mr. Card Porn, thank you so much for being here. I can't believe that's how
Thank
this whole conversation started.
Amazing. Yeah, no, thanks again for having me on, and I appreciate sort of just the perspective that you brought to this interview, or well, fireside chat slash interview,
Yeah,
and the I know you don't like to say interview, but and just it's good questions. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness
thank
behind them
you.
and getting some of these from your audience, which has been great. And one
Yeah,
last thing is, you
yes.
have been very nice and very
Mhm.
complimentary, but you're missing the big part of these stories where I'm saying I lost money here, I lost money there, and so like I'm learning too. Like I've made so
Mhm.
many mistakes in this process, and
Yeah,
it's kind of why I love it. Is it's like I've been doing nothing but this for 3 years, and I'm still like
right.
really early in like what I want to learn and all these things. So, anyways, thanks for having me on. Thanks for letting me tell a bit more of the story, and hopefully this shed some light on sort of like things that whatever we're working on and different angles of the
Yeah,
grading industry.
I just wanna uplift your awesome, company and yourself, and now people can put a face to, the name because they didn't get to go to the Beckett party. But don't leave the studio. I'm gonna end the recording, but I'm gonna say goodbye here. Oh, no, I forgot to press record this whole time. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I've been waiting to do that for someone, but I was like, now that I'm
I looked
actually
quickly. I looked
yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time. I'm no, I really early on, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what if this doesn't save?" But now that I have like a good process, like watch this one actually not save. But no, you have been fantastic, Ryan. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna end the recording now, and we'll just chat after I press this big red button.